Well, last week we fixed racism. You're welcome from white people. Obviously joking. We had a rough week last week with Code of Honor. In fact, I even thought about just skipping the episode entirely because maybe the best zhuzh of all is to set it on fire and move along home, a la Moraine. But I did my best. And I look forward to the comments on what I did with it. What did I do with it? I don't know because I haven't recorded that episode yet. We're doing these out of order. So I've fixed racism for you last week, but I will actually be doing it probably a week after recording this because today we are on episode, I think they call it 5, but it's the 4th one because Farpoint was a 2-parter. We're at the Last Outpost where we get our first introduction of the Ferengi. And our first introduction to Armin Shimmerman, despite the fact they actually filmed Haven before this episode. So chronologically, he was on set before, but we see him for the first time here. But I'm not going to tackle this one alone. Third time's the charm. I have back with me a lifelong Star Trek fan from Los Angeles, the director of campaign operations for the Human Rights Campaign, available on all the socials at @onlystands85. Once again, with me to tackle the Ferengi, Stanley Williams. How you doing, Stanley?
I'm doing much better. Fighting a cold, but I'm 99%.
99%. Well, it's a better rating than this episode.
Yes. Yes.
So what do you remember your first contact with this episode? Like when you first saw it or anything from it?
It would have been when I was a kid and much less critical, thankfully. But honestly, no, I think my memories of this episode are more on rewatching as an adult.
Right. I have very vivid memories of the energy whips.
Oh, yes.
And then, of course, I remember this was one of the figures in the first Playmates release.
Yeah.
They gave you a Klingon they said was Gowron and looked nothing like him. A Romulan they said was a Romulan but looked everything like Tomalak. Or no, not Tomalak. The one in the Defector who's on the planet with or the enemy, the one on the planet with Geordi.
Oh.
He looks like him.
His name. Nice.
I used to know his name. But starts with a B. It's not Barack, but it's something like that. It's a B. It's 2 syllables. But it'll come to me in the middle of this episode. Shit. I will. I'm not going to look it up. I will remember it through this episode. It will come to me. I know some of you listening to this episode are screaming the answer right now at this podcast. Pretty sure it starts with a B. So, and then it was this Ferengi whom I think they used the same head shape for mini Nog that came with Rom when they made Rom and Nog. If you look at it, it's just shrunk. And that means that head works great as a custom Nog.
Nice. Yeah, that looks great.
Yeah, it looks a lot. So I'm holding up to camera for those of you who are seeing this, you are on the Patreon. Thank you very much. Patreon.com/theobservationlounge, where you can get exclusive videos, early access to videos, and video versions of this podcast. So I just showed my custom figure of Deep Space Nine Nog. I've made 2 of him using that Ferengi head and different bodies. I've made the one in his Starfleet uniform, and out of my reach at the moment, I have him in his cadet uniform as well. So I remember that toy, which that comes from this episode, that the look of that Ferengi. And it took until they did Deep Space Nine figures to get a Ferengi the way like they're dressed, through the rest of Berman era Trek.
Yeah, not this weirdness. I love their ship.
Oh, the ship's beautiful.
Yeah, the whip thing is interesting if misplaced and misused. Like, I remember seeing that toy as a kid too, and like I mean, we'll get into it. There's a lot about the Ferengi in this episode that's like, ugh, woof.
Right. So I think most people listening to this episode know that the Ferengi were originally intended to be the big bads of the next generation. And after this episode went down like a lead balloon, everyone said, no, no thanks, something else. And they would come back later. I don't know if did we see them in the second season? I'm thinking we saw them in the Price the next time, where they were negotiating for the Barzan wormhole. I can't remember anything before that. I don't think Menage a Troy was before that. Oh yes, I forgot that is, and that's this season.
Yeah.
Right. I can't remember if they were in. I watched season 2 recently. I'm not recalling. Again, if they have been, someone is screaming at this podcast. But yeah, they did not go over well, so it was abandoned. And they were reinvented as the ultra capitalist society later.
Hmm.
And of course, Armin Shimmerman, who would later become Quark, was the first Ferengi, which is fitting. And we would, of course, see, I forget the actor's name, Mark G name, Matt or Mark G name is Rom, and he would be first introduced in Captain's Holiday as the Ferengi after Picard and Vash. Yeah, so Ferengi. Yeah, the whip. It's just not practical.
Yeah. Like,
how you gonna shoot
flings in the right way?
Shoot a laser beam from a whip. Yeah, it just makes no sense. Anyway, so let's do a quick summary of this episode, because if you are listening to a podcast like this, you have seen this episode probably at least 3 times. So what we get here, in pursuit of Ferengi marauders, the Enterprise and its quarry, what summary is this? Become trapped by a mysterious planet that is draining both ships' energies. So basically, they're chasing after the Ferengi because the Ferengi stole something, and they find that the Ferengi are trapped in some energy field. The Enterprise is trapped in another energy field. Ferengi don't know that the Enterprise is trapped, and they think that they've been caught. And they eventually figure out that the energy drain is coming from the surface. They beam down to Crystal Planet, have a little battle between themselves, which they'll redo again in Hide and Q, almost beat by beat. And just different colored sky, same rocks, plus crystals. And they run into a gatekeeper, a guardian, a caretaker of some sort. Star Trek loves the word caretaker, who is the gatekeeper of the Takan Empire, who doesn't seem to be aware that that was millennia ago and they don't exist anymore. And this is the last outpost of the Takan Empire. And then, and maybe Stanley, you'll explain this to me because I didn't quite understand it. There's some sort of, the Ferengi and Riker kind of plead their cases to the Takan Empire, and Takan throws a spear at Riker, and then you didn't flinch, and so you win. I don't know. It was weird. And then they let them go.
Yeah, the zhuzhening is needed.
The zhuzhening is needed. Do you have a better explanation for why? Why?
So they don't say it explicitly. So this is one of those episodes, like some of the best episodes of Trek, you need a little bit of headcanon to make it make some sense. I believe the Guardian is also a mind reader, a telepath.
Yes, I do remember that.
What Riker was thinking is like, oh, Sun Tzu, let's test this battle strategy or whatever that this guy's thinking about to see if it's if he really believes it, whatever. Like that's my best effort.
Something that I find really interesting, and I didn't watch a lot of TOS, I know, Clutch Pearls, but something I find interesting about season 1, particularly of Next Gen, and I wonder if it was true with TOS, is this: everyone is obsessed with Earth history, specifically Earth history. And you'd think that in the 24th century, where it's this melding of all of these different worlds of the Federation, that like maybe Riker has more knowledge and interest in the ancient Bolians than he does, Earth people. Like, you'd think they'd have more varied interests in histories and things.
Yes.
And not just, and even the aliens always know, like, I believe that is similar to your Shakespeare. Like, why does every alien know Shakespeare?
Right. And like where it works really well is Star Trek 6. Klingons having an interest in Shakespeare is incredibly interesting and deep, and it shows their tactical skill. Like, we are learning about our enemy, and humans and Starfleet should do the same, particularly not about their enemies, but their own damn Federation. Like,
well, that's one of the things that I really liked about Picard, because by painting him as an amateur archaeologist, anthropologist, he had interest in those cultures. And then Tim taking the role of as Jadich for Worf, it got him, like, he knew about Klingon culture, and it made him sort of the statesman that had a lot of varied interests. And I liked that. And I just thought more people, like, I always had a problem on Voyager with Tom being obsessed with, like, Americana. It's like, is there literally nothing else? Are you that boring?
It always felt like a reason to bring in something from today. Like, it's easier and a
reason to bring in sets and props that already exist from other productions that they don't have to custom build. Yes, for sure. Like when Voyager finds a truck floating in space.
Yes.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Although I do kind of love that episode, the 37.
No. Oh, Amelia Earhart. No.
The convenience of one of my loving criticisms of Voyager is not leaning into their own premise. Like the number of times something from the Alpha Quadrant just happens to be on their path home, it, like, the odds of that are in the real universe is infinitesimally small. And so, like, I love Trek when it's doing something new. That's actually something I love about this episode, is like, they don't do it well, but they're doing something new. And
it paid dividends in the end.
Yes.
Because the Ferengi became, like, I would say the third pillar race culture of Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Bajorans, Cardassians, Ferengi, and then I'd probably say the Dominion, because the Ferengi were around a little longer. Yeah. But, like, very rich storytelling. I mean, they had the drag episode, which they can keep. But other than that, they had a lot of really great stories out of Ferengi. So had not this episode happened, we may not have ever had Quark, Rom, and Nog.
Yeah. And it's something that's great about franchises is new storytellers coming along in 10, 20 years will be able to pick up on stuff from here. Like,
in Picard, I loved Sneed. I thought that was a great take on now I didn't love that. I had a real problem. And by the way, subscribers, I will be doing a Patreon only recap of the 10 episodes of Picard season 3. So look out for that on Patreon, just for Patreons. But one of my issues with Picard season 3 was with Sneed getting his head chopped off unnecessarily. Because to me, that was still an element of, like, new Trek, of just like, we just want to see a head fall off. Make him do it, instead of it being justified because he had a phaser. He just zapped him with a phaser.
Yeah, and swords are fun.
And then when that happened in episode 10, I was like, okay, now I'm fine with it.
I did want one extra line there saying, like, he could have just stunned everybody and saved her. And on the Twitter space that I hosted that week, my co-host made the apt observation that, it was Starfleet intelligence that became not just a rescue mission, that became a cleanup mission. And so
except for the fact that Sneed had intel, because even Rafi made the comment of, like, well, if you wouldn't chop his fucking head off, then I think we'd probably know what was going on.
But it was very Worf. I am a known Worf hater.
I used to be, but as I grew up, I became
Season 3 made me like Worf a lot more. That was still a mistake, I thought, I thought it gave them an opportunity to have a different kind of Vulcan, which I thought was cool, but ended up being, I felt it maybe a little unnecessary. Like they could have just kept Sneed and replaced that whole aspect of it. But like I loved it overall. But
Right. Well, the reason they were
yeah, the
two is
beheading was weird.
because Terry wanted to pull in his two friends from 12 Monkeys. So
And it worked out really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
But
a lot to
notice
say about that season.
exactly, and why we're veering away from this episode, because I don't know how much there is to say about this episode, which seems quite light. So we've
Yes.
gone through the summary. Basically, it wanted to set up the Ferengi as these sort of, it had the elements of what the Ferengi became in terms of the ultra capitalist, and Data uses a reference like they're like the something something of Earth, and it's like, okay, Data, like what a weird reference.
That whole section.
Well, I'm holding my tongue on something that is going to the fucking brig. I don't want to bring it up yet, and I'm sure you have it too. But yeah, so the idea of them as ultra capitalists and wanting to bargain and trade and all of that stuff is set there, and that from the start, when you set up Next Gen, as the first episode establishes that, like, whether or not Q is showing up and Q is interacting, the show is still set up as an example of the advancement of humanity. And so to have who we now know the Ferengis to be a contrast to that, to sort of be the worst version of our current capital society,
yes,
is good and interesting and could have been done really well on Next Gen. But then when they finally leaned into it, they really played it more for comedy, that they were buffoons. And I honestly think that has to do with the costume design.
Yeah, absolutely. I have that in my zhuzhening, like leaning into the capitalism of the Ferengi and not the buffoonery.
Because if they were not big-eared trolls who were on set directed to Armin Shimmerman's quote is saying we were told to act like jittery gerbils. If that was not the direction,
the hand stuff,
yes, and they didn't look so goofy, then maybe they would have been intimidating and could have been, beefed up later. But I think the look did the most disservice to that plan. Yeah. So it didn't work. And the Takan Empire I don't think has ever been referenced again in canon, beta canon, I know. Oh, have we seen it again?
We haven't, I don't think, but I just saw today on Twitter, Trek Twitter famous, Jörg Hildebrand, hopefully I said that correctly.
Yes.
Eagle-eyed viewer for years. He's the one on Twitter who will post like, here's this plexiglass screen from episode 203, and here it is 6 seasons later in the captain's quarters. Incredible eye for detail, very appropriately hired by Star Trek Picard in season 2 and 3 as a researcher. A lot of really cool details ended up in the show thanks to his eyes. He noticed and actually just is rewatching this episode today as well. And I saw just before we started recording, the Takan Empire is apparently going to be an aspect of the new Star Trek Resurgence game that's coming out next Tuesday. He noticed their little emblem is in the teaser poster for the game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I'm sure they've showed up in Star Trek Online.
I think so. It's been a while since I played. Usually, like I love Star Trek Online. I play through it once, but then like the new stuff, but then it gets a little repetitive.
It does,
but it's still fun once a new episode comes out. So I'm constantly replaying.
And but I don't remember them ever referencing it, because if we reference one of those empires, it's usually the Iconians. We'll talk about them, but we won't really talk about the Takano or the.
I think they're called who are the ones who part of the Romulus expansion was really awesome. I think they're called the Solanae. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but like there were touches of secret empires from eons past, but I don't think Takan ever came up.
Well, and then of course in the chase we have whoever these progenitors are, the ones who how Star Trek explains why we're all just humans with funny foreheads.
Yes, that is a beautiful episode. That
it is.
just so happens to say production costs are what they are, deal with it.
Right. And which is why I think in Picard season 3 all the other changelings were just in bird masks. But and that gave us I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, but I think it's Salome Jens, who played then the female shapeshifter, who basically looks almost identical.
Yeah.
Great. So anyway, we keep getting away from this episode. So let's go through, before we zhuzh the episode, let us go through what has the con, as in what we like and what we will likely keep, and what goes to the brig from this episode. Stanley, feel free to start us off with either, and then I'll take the alternate.
Sure. So overall, I think a fun mystery attempt is happening here with a little bit of deflection of who the real bad guy is, or the real problem. There's some cool use of future tech that they would end up abandoning with the holograms. There's some humor in this episode, but I've got to give my first who has the con to Deanna. We'll talk more about that in the zhuzhening. Deanna is the one who says, y'all have been ignoring the planet right below us, right? And then we start to realize, oh yeah, it's the planet, not the Ferengi. So Deanna is my first person who has the con in this episode for sure.
When her powers actually are useful.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'll go to the brig, and before you say it, I'm gonna say it. That Chinese finger trap, go fuck yourself.
Yes.
That's so bad. Who thought of that? One, kids playing in the observation lounge. How did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Two, like the way to get to the observation lounge isn't it through the bridge?
Or even that secondary hatch on the.
But doesn't that go to the bridge too?
It's still deck 1, like wherever it is. This is something I wrote down later. When they go out one side, that the side that they shoo the kids out of seems to be
the hallway side.
Yeah, and then the opposite side is the one to the bridge, I thought.
Maybe.
Just
the hallway, I guess, goes to the turbo lift or something. I don't know. Yeah. I have the blueprint, so I can look it up. But
why would the kids be playing there? So many cool things. Like, go to Cetacean Ops. That's where I would be playing. I want to see
the turbo lift would never allow them to get there.
Yes.
It would not. They would not be able to call the turbo lift to take them to the bridge.
Yeah.
So that was weird. And then and there's such inconsistency with what Data knows and what he doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that Starfleet Academy graduate who can download tomes of information and has most of the ship's computer in his brain does not know what a Chinese finger trap is.
And couldn't
just one, rip it off, or two, look at it and quickly understand, like, oh, and okay. Like, you'd think he'd be able to figure that out.
Yeah.
Wild. The whole Chinese finger trap thing is wild.
Yeah. It would, if they were going to go with that specifically, a different character who had never encountered that toy as a child. Like, oh, I don't get what this is, because that's not how, like, my brain works anymore. I'm not a child. I never seen one of these, but not Data.
Let me tell you, if that would have been in a script in the 3rd season or 4th season, it would have been Worf, and he would have tore it out of frustration.
Yes.
And it would have been funny.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so weird. Just weird. And it meant nothing. Like, I guess they kind of used it for the analogy of, like, what's happening to the ship, but it was like,
yeah. I never think it was made that connection, but like,
it wasn't explicit. It was like implied. It was like, because Geordi's talking about how, the countervailing forces are what keeps them, together, which is the Chinese finger trap. And it makes me think there was a scene where that gave them the idea about that or something.
Yeah.
Because it just felt so out of place.
It felt like filler. They're like, we have half of an episode. How do we expand this a little bit?
And someone's kid on set just had one, and they were like, "Oh, let's use this."
Yeah.
Weird.
In the brig. Right. Into the brig.
So now you send something to the brig, so I can be nice next time.
Well, the Ferengi. they need some zhuzhening, which we'll get to, but um, they're in the brig. Just not the Ferengi in general, but like this introduction to the Ferengi. We've already talked about it, but I had them on my list for the Ferengi. But here's something new we haven't talked about: the lack of more of the Takan. Like we get a reference to them. This is their last outpost, but the only thing there, and again, I know that this is a production thing and the cost, but the only thing there is this weird guardian. No no actual outpost. It's just the planet. So that's in the brig. I want to see actual outpost. I want to see their technology. I want to see why would the Ferengi go into this planet. I don't want it to be just random, which again, I keep alluding to my zhuzhening.
It also doesn't make sense that he is the guardian for the entrance to the Empire, and he's sitting on this rando planet as if every ship had to pass by this particular planet in this particular solar system to gain, like there's a gate there to gain entry. It should have been some sort of station on a perimeter, and it's like the last one operating at what used to be a grid of barriers to an area of space. And then you don't have a planet, and it's just this at first undetected, but then they are able to scan it eventually, and it comes, or it decloaks, or it whatever. To me, it would be, and this comes to my zhuzhing, take from alien space station creature above Injustice, above Ito, mix it with the hologram in the Arsenal of Freedom.
Yeah.
That's a better version of what they tried to do with this Takan thing, in my view.
Yeah.
But for me, what has the con, with the exception of the conversation about sedating Wesley before he dies, the power drain on the ship, seeing them have to like hunker down, seeing the lights go out, the environmental, was it done a million times better in no-win scenario in Picard season 3? Absolutely. But that concept of seeing that happening on a ship, we don't really see that. We see ships that are damaged, that, you know, places can't be accessed or things aren't working, but like the actual, like, oh, we're all gonna die, there's no energy left and everything is shutting down. I don't think we've seen that a whole lot. Not enough to become a trope in Star Trek.
Yeah, and
I like
one of the aspects I liked. I think they could have fleshed it out a little bit better. Like, why are they all in the observation lounge now and not like hunkered down in crew quarters or whatever? But the sedating Wesley was an interesting aspect of it. Like, I see the mother's instinct. Like, what do we do about the children? How do we ease their suffering? Like, if you're gonna go there, like, go there. Have the conversation. Like, don't just make it about her saving or her easing the suffering of her child. Like, there could be a conversation where it's like, hey, we're just going to talk about this. I'm not suggesting anything, but like, if we don't get out of this, we've got kids on board. How are we going to ease them? How are we going to ease their pain through this? If that's something that they feel like they need to be doing in the first place.
Well, and maybe it's just because I'm a child-hating monster, but why wouldn't that be true of why wouldn't everyone be sedated? Like, we're going to all sedate ourselves, you know, right, at the point of the end so that we all don't die horribly.
Yeah. The only thing that immediately comes to mind is like, in case the adults can technobabble their way out of it. But yes. Non-essential personnel, regardless of age, let's put them to sleep. Actual sleep, not death.
Right. I throw this out entirely, so it won't come up in my zhuzh, but talking about it now, it would have been better if it were there's someone revving their engine outside my apartment. If Picard went to Beverly, like, where's, you know, is Wesley okay? Like, being concerned about Wesley, and her saying that she had sedated him, that she had done it in her own discretion, and him sort of being, you know, having his stupid, a man should face death, blah, 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 stupid thing. And her basically saying, that's none of your fucking business, I'm his mother. I think that would have been a better, if you want to keep that.
That'd be a fun book ending with a card of
Yeah.
like, she made a decision, you can understand, you could disagree with it, you could agree with it, but yeah,
Right.
more depth for Beverly early on would be great.
Anything else have the con for you?
Uh, I put down new things. Like I love Star Trek when they're trying new things, whether it works or not. Like all of the newer shows are trying new things, and like give me any episode, and I can find something new that might I like that, something that I don't, whatever. But I appreciate trying to expand things and not just
Mm-hmm.
regurgitate what we've already seen in a Star Trek universe.
Right.
But also Tasha being badass. They didn't give her much, but we got a little bit of badass Tasha in this, dealing with the Ferengi on the planet. I would have loved a little bit more, obviously, but
Of course.
I love Tasha.
So we've talked about most of my brigs, even through other conversations. The only one I have left is the same thing I sent to the brig for Encounter at Farpoint, which is the way that Picard talks to Riker like he's an idiot. Like, I just the way that they discuss tactics and this and that, it's like Riker, was he not the first officer of the Hood? He was the first officer of the Hood, because
I
the whole
think
thing
so.
came
I think
down to
they,
like, I chose you because you wouldn't let the captain go down on a mission, blah 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 blah
yes,
blah.
yeah,
So he was first officer of the Hood. He's done this before. He's done it for other captains. Why are you talking to him like he's just out of the academy?
right. Uh, Interesting flip side, not flip side, similar. I didn't put it in the brig, but I was gonna mention it somewhere in here. Throughout the first season, and I think a little bit into the second, I love Jonathan Frakes, but in these first couple of episodes and seasons, he does a little bit of shout acting that feels a little
Yes.
odd. He has, and he goes in this episode in particular, he goes up and down at his volume at like a very weird cadence. Particularly when he's talking with Data about the Ferengis, like Yankee traders. What do you mean Yankee traders? It's like it's weird cadence for sure.
And that any of them would
Understood.
know what a Yankee is. Like, everyone learned that in history class in the 24th century.
Mhm.
It'd be such a minor blip in overall history.
Yes.
The only time I really liked it was in Attached, which is one of my favorite episodes, where Beverly says something like, well, what if one of the old nation states like Australia? Like, I
Mhm.
thought that was fun because it's future, and like it kind of
Yes.
references that made sense to me. But to just to talk about the Yankees as if, like, other than World War II, the world wars, I think would be things everybody would know. But like the minor, I don't know. I just think
Like
it's so minor, no one should know it.
even people in America, like there's a lot of American history we do teach that I think could be thrown out so that we could teach some real history of this
Oh,
country.
for sure.
But the Yankee traders would be like one of them. Like we don't need to know.
No, it's weird. So the last thing I have, so that was all the brig. Do I have anything else on my list? Oh, just even though we don't like the Ferengi, I say give the con to Armin Shiverman, who did the best he could do, and we're happy to have him. I do like
Always.
establishing their treatment of women, because I think that's such an important
Yes.
part to the Ferengi.
And their hearing.
And their hearing.
Mhm.
Though it is kind of like, just because they have big ears
Yes.
means they have sensitive hearing. It's so like, okay.
Well, there was the Data says trader, and the Damon could hear that. Like, yes, definitely the
Yeah.
big ear thing is a little much, but at least
It was
we get
better when they
hints.
turned them into genitals later.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is funny and
Yes.
interesting and weird.
Yes.
Umox. But the other thing I'll say is I liked the Ferengi first officer.
Mhm.
I liked the sort of first officer to first officer kind of like rapport that he had with Riker, in a way that I don't know. It's not the right episode. What they had to talk about wasn't interesting. Just the very concept of like Riker appealing to the person in his position on the other ship
Yeah.
and having like the rapport of both being in the same position despite, being on different sides of it and being able to have that like line between you because of that commonality. I just think is a very interesting thing. And I actually really like that actor and that performance. I was like, oh, this guy, I like this guy. This guy's good.
Yeah, I wish they had kept that going throughout their scenes together, because then the first interaction with the Ferengi and the Guardian was fine, whatever. But then later, as the Guardian is clearly favoring Riker's perspective, they're like, well, we told them that. They're like, he's just repeating something we said. Like, why are we if you want to make this the enemy of this show, why are you making them so stupid? Like, it does not work.
All right. Well, I think that means it's time to zhuzh this thing.
Mm.
All right. So let's set our phasers to zhuzh. As always, the guest gets to go first. So Stanley, you got 5-ish minutes on the clock. How are you zhuzhing the Last Outpost?
Well, thank you very much. So I've got a lot of chicken scratch here, and I wasn't able to put it in a proper format. So if I was giving a treatment to a studio, this would not be how I present it. But this episode is going to be two things. It's going to be a Deanna episode, and it's going to be a clear juxtaposition between capitalism with the Ferengi and the Federation non-capitalism. I'm going to cut a good chunk of the stuff before we actually get to the planet, or make it shorter. The briefing will be shorter. I'll keep in the stuff about how the drain on the ship is affecting the crew, because like that's upping the stakes and it's important. But I'm gonna cut a lot of the stuff before getting to the planet. And like the stuff with Riker and Data talking about Yankee traders, like we were just talking about, like that's getting the axe. There's going to be more for Deanna, realizing the Ferengi deception. The Ferengi are going to be introduced as the barbaric rumor that we've heard, but it's going to be on purpose. The Ferengi are so distrustful of the Federation because they don't have a monetized economy, that they themselves, so that they could hoard profit in these other sectors, have spread this rumor that they're barbaric and that like you want to avoid them at all costs, so that they can hoard the profits wherever they find them. So it's a tactical decision to hoard wealth, and that's the connection to the real world, is billionaires hoarding wealth, acting like, well, we can't pay workers appropriately because then it like whatever, and trickle down economics will save us all. Don't worry about it.
Right.
Deanna is going to be the one who starts to unravel their deception. Like she senses that he's holding something back, and then there will be more between Deanna and the Ferengi. She's going to go down to the planet. She's going to be the one who's going to be the primary lead. Like Riker will still be in charge and have the Sun Tzu moment with the Guardian, but Deanna is going to be the one who's like communicating for the most part and negotiating between the two sides. We're going to establish Counselor Troy as not just a therapist counselor, but a diplomat counselor. Sort of the duality of her role will be fleshed out in this episode. The Ferengi, like the device that they stole, is going to be purposeful, not just random. And on the planet, there's like whatever device they steal, it was a power converter of some kind. I'm going to say they needed it, or change the device entirely to be like a better scanner to find the actual outpost on the planet. They're going to the planet to pillage it for profit. They want to sell off the technology. They think the Takan Empire is dead as well, and they're shocked when the Guardian shows up. They're like, "Oh shit! We thought like we were going to sell this technology. We didn't know you were going to be here." And yeah, the Guardian is like, it needs to be explicitly stated that he is also a telepath, like some kind of artificial telepath. Like, give us that weird mystery that's not fully explained, but a little bit more than we got in this episode. And that's how he and Deanna connect telepathically. And that's the first bridge. And it's like, you are you are different than even the rest of your people. Your own first officer here has tactical stuff on his brain, and she explains that's his role on our ship. It's not for offensive purposes, it's defensive, and that's when he does his weird axe thing to prove it. And she ties in all of those pieces a little bit more neatly. And that is my zhuzhening. A little all over
Very
the place
nice.
this week, but
No,
those pieces.
I was surprised you made it a Deanna episode because she has an important thing to do, but otherwise doesn't feature very prominently.
And I'm gonna fix that.
And we're gonna fix that. Yeah, I'm surprised you kept the Guardian axe throwing. I'm glad you cut all the stuff leading up to the planet. I assume though that as they fly away, or that as the power's being drained from the ship, Beverly hands every child a Chinese finger trap to keep them busy.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I should have said I'm leaning into the finger trap puzzle, not cutting it entirely.
They throw them at the Ferengi and they get stuck in them, and that's how they're
Yes.
incapacitated. Oh God. All right. So my Zhuzh. So I'm starting from the standpoint of what is this episode about? Like, what is this about? Because I can't really answer that with Last Outpost other than introducing the Ferengi, showing that the Federation is benevolent through its portal, I think is what they call it, by the Takan portal. Yeah, I'm throwing that away. What I'm making it is about working with other people who you find their morals and values and society to be repugnant, but needing to find somehow way to work together to solve a problem that impacts both of you. The key of that, so it's a Riker episode about diplomacy, and this is going to be him learning this is how he learns from Picard, because he thinks tactically and he thinks this and that, and it's through him and Picard working together that he sort of gets the benefit of Picard's experience and becomes a better diplomat in this episode.
Nice.
The center of it, just what we get to, and the main crux of it is they find out, possibly from the Takan representative himself. So they aren't holding them there. The outpost, which for me is not a planet, it's a remaining piece of once a light years long network of outposts and stations that blocked off this area of space. It's like the only one left, and for some reason still operating. It put out some sort of a pulse, particle beam, something that incapacitated, that trapped the two ships in this, and though we're not going to have it, but in a Chinese finger trap like thing, that if they each try to pull away, they're pulled back to each other and they're just kind of stuck there. It's the gate's way to keep people out unless they've approved entry. And they eventually learn by talking to the portal that, like, well, we're not holding you here. This is what's done is done. And that's just the way it is. And unfortunately, the only way that any of you could get out of it is if one of you blew up the other, you could ride that wave away.
Okay.
And it's Riker and Picard basically, instead of the axe throwing and all of that, it's them basically like, we won't do that. The Ferengi will, and are trying to figure out how, but they won't. Everyone on the ship knew the risks of traveling in space. Yes, we have children on the ship. Yes, this and that. We will not destroy another life form regardless of what we think about them and who they are. We won't do that. We live by our ideals. And you find that this was one of the, like the Minotaur. This was the test. And so he can release them, and he does.
Nice.
And it creates a reticent first contact between the Ferengi. Like, the Ferengi still don't like them. They obviously don't like the Ferengi based on what they've now learned about how they treat women and capitalist society and all of that stuff. But it sets itself up that they're not like going to be at war with each other.
Yeah.
It's a tepid first contact because they didn't end up destroying them. Anything else I have in here? Yeah, the Ferengi are there because they want the riches. They don't need to steal a thing and have the Enterprise, they both responded to the same thing that attracted them to that outpost. Yeah. And blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's it. That is my Zhuzh.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, especially, I just want all of the things in season one of the things I would really want to fix that was fixed later was the Picard-Riker dynamic. And if you're going to have Picard be the elder mentor of this young, fresh officer, whom they never explicitly say it, but the reason Picard might like Riker is Riker's a lot how Picard was.
Mm-hmm.
Before, and so he might see his younger self in Riker.
Yeah. More brash, more prone, and we'll see this in Tapestry when he was younger.
Right.
He was quick to throw a punch.
And a ladies' man and all of that. So fleshing out that kind of, and maybe even having a conversation about that at some point, of stilted one, but one that just reveals why Picard is taking such a mentorship role to Riker.
Yeah,
and
some
just
of these things
establishing
kind of just happen, but they don't make it happen in an organic way. That's the relationship they end up with.
Right.
In this season, we could have seen a lot more of how they got there.
And that's because, hindsight is 2020 and, but, at that time, everything was just plot driven with archetype characters playing out the roles. It wasn't until season 3 that the episodes became about the characters.
And it had to be episodic, more so than even episodic television today. Nobody needs to know anything about anything to watch this episode in their random city when it's on at 4 p.m. on Sunday.
In any distribution order that the local network wants to do it.
Yep.
They just made it as sellable as possible since they didn't have a home network to put it on.
Yeah.
Which I have to say probably made it I don't understand why more TV isn't being made that way today, because there was some, but the network interference in scripts. There was studio because Paramount was making it, but you didn't have the network and people coming down to set and changing things and saying what could and couldn't be done. There was probably a little bit more freedom.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, good on them for at least leaning, they made the decision to make this a syndication only model, and they leaned into that hard and stuck with that decision. Something that's I always find frustrating is when if you make a decision, you got to stick with it. I come from the campaign world, so I've been able to notice oh, they clearly thought this was going to go differently and now they're floundering, instead of just sticking with their the Obama campaign, particularly in 2008, did this very well. They were not rocked by the controversy of the week. They're we will respond to this, but from our actual plan and messaging. We're not going to flounder every time somebody throws something at us, because that's how the opposition is always going to try and get you. I feel the same model can be applied to business decisions and even creative decisions. If you're going to change something, you need to have a good reason. Otherwise, why even have your outline? If you're not going to follow your own model, then what are we doing?
Well, but with Next Gen, the syndication, from how I understand it, it wasn't a choice. It was none of the networks wanted it. And they were going to make it anyway. So it was okay, I guess we're going to do it this way. And it ended up being, the best decision for them. I don't know if Next Gen would have made it after. A network probably would have canceled it after season 1 or 2.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which is what happened, to Enterprise. Enterprise would have probably kept going if it didn't have a parent network. I think it was another reason that, Voyager may not have worked, because instead of being sold to syndication, it was the UPN show. So you had to have UPN, and that wasn't broadly available in all these markets.
Yeah, and you had to have those weird tie-ins. The Rock was on Voyager because they were leading into a wrestling match. Oh, big yikes.
Oh boy.
These studios, like, give give the creatives everything they want. This writer strike that's probably going to go on a lot more. We're in week 3 for the listeners, like, of the 2023 writer strike. It's likely going to go much longer because the studios are very short-sighted. Like,
I
it's
don't
just
know if they're
insane.
short-sighted. I think they know that if they budge on this, they lose in the long term. Like, there's so much opportunity for them to make so much money and not have to pay these people that they want to hold fucking firm and
I
change how the industry works.
I think you're right about that. That's their thinking, but I don't think
Yes.
that is correct. I don't think
Oh
their
no, I
thinking
don't
is
agree with them.
correct. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no, I don't agree with
I know
them.
you don't. Yeah, but I think about Senator Wellstone had this quote during his campaigns: "We all do better when we all do better."
Mhm.
Like, the studios are going to make money hand over fist if they have great content. They are going to make a little bit less, I would say, if they have less desirable content. But everybody is always like, even in hard times, we want entertainment. We cut back on our entertainment budget. That's the first thing that gets cut. But we need an escape because this world,
Right.
the simulation sucks, and we need that escape. So, like, I mean, I'm as lefty as they come in this regard on capitalism, but I also want to make money. I live in a capitalistic
Yeah.
society, so, like, I get the impetus. And the problem is when your sole metric of success is how much money your shareholders are making versus steady, like, the phrase in business circles of exponential growth and
Right.
scale, rather than, like, if I had a business, I don't want exponential growth. I don't want to be constantly trying to keep up with my market. I want steady growth. I
Right.
want manageable growth. I want balance, but
Well,
I'm out of step with business in that way.
and I know we're for those of you who we are done judging the episodes. For those you don't want to hear me talk about or hear us talk about capitalism, feel free to tune in next week. Thank you so much for joining us. But the thing I always say to this is, so my background is as an attorney, and I remember I don't practice this kind of law, but the problem is the way the system is set up with respect to fiduciary duties
Mhm.
from the managers and the directors to the company to the shareholders. There is a case that we read in law school where a CEO made a decision that was less lucrative for the company, but more environmentally friendly. And the shareholders sued him for breaching his fiduciary duties to them because the system is set up that you must always act in the benefit of the shareholders, and that is the most amount of money now.
Yeah, and
It's the
that's the
way it's
model
set
that
up.
needs. Yeah, and
It's the
that's
model.
that we need to fix that model.
And the
Like,
only way that you can get around that is if you are a privately owned family company who you're making the decisions and it's yours and you don't owe anything to anybody. Then you
yeah.
can act how you want to act. But
Mhm.
once you get to that level of scale, you can't. And that is why we need regulation in government to draw the boundaries of that sandbox you can play in, so that yes, you can do anything you want, but we're drawing the lines of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah.
But we deregulate because sometimes bad things are more lucrative, and
Yep.
people care more about the lucrative than they care about doing well for society. Anyway, what? No, my dog's upset. I think that he's barking. He's like, Jack, talking about politics. Now I'll
Upset
get all
about
these
capitalism.
comments. Stick to Star Trek. Stay out of politics. Can't wait to
Yes.
read all of those.
Totally non-political Trek since 1966.
That's right. I'm trying to think of a good segue out of this, but yeah, I got nothing. Well, so we also know at the time we were talking about the writer's strike, SAG actors have also just authorized the ability to
Mhm.
strike. So they have that ability. They have not gone on strike. Maybe by the time of this airing, they have. But the other issue is, yes, they're going to make, they're trying to turn writing into what everyone is trying to turn all labor into, which is a gig economy.
Yeah. Day
Everyone's going to be
rate.
a day rate 1099s, no benefits.
No longer a career. It's just something you do on the side.
You'll write this TV show, you'll drive an Uber, you'll work at Starbucks, and you'll cobble all that together to live in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 roommates.
Yeah. And don't complain about it, because if you don't like it, move elsewhere.
There
do
are other
something
people
else.
who
Get
will
a
do
better
it.
job.
Yep. Bootstraps. Anyway. All right. Well, maybe we need like a side podcast where we talk about lefty things, bridged from Star Trek.
It's so funny. My buddy Matthew, he's a professor of political science. He was planning to, and I think he still is planning to do a podcast about the politics of Star Trek.
Ooh.
I don't know who the other person is, but Mary Trump is going to be doing a podcast with somebody about the politics of Star Trek, and he sent that to me, and I felt bad for him because it reminded me of his dissertation had to change because someone else published what his idea was going to be. I was like, oh man, this keeps happening to you, buddy.
Well, the good thing about Trek is, listen, if I so many other people do this podcast. In fact, I just found another Star Trek podcast that uses the same cover art that I used for the first season, where Sean and I had our heads as the 2 captains in the Generations poster.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That was our icon. And then like last week, I go online and there's a more popular Star Trek podcast that does that. I was like, God damn it.
Everything is derivative of everything else. We live in 2023, not 1901 with the first whatever. It's fine.
But all Trek people want more Trek people talking about Trek, and the more the merrier. So tell your friend, do it. People will listen to both.
Doing it. Yes. And in fact, I bet he will have better insights than Mary Trump. Although she is not her brother.
Shots fired at Mary Trump. Shots fired.
I'm sure she's fine, especially in comparison, but
all right, well, we will leave all of you to go check out Mary Trump's Star Trek podcast. I hope you'll join us back here in the Observation Lounge for Star Trek Zhuzh-erations next week, where I'll do the next episode, which I don't have handy with me, but it's probably another stinker. What is it? What's 106?
I think it's Where No Man Has Gone Before.
Oh, The Groomer. Excellent. So where the traveler grooms Wesley.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Speaking of bringing 2023 nonsense into the zeitgeist, God.
Traveler's the original groomer. So we will get to that next week. Until then, for those of you who don't have the video, Stanley's facial reaction, his reaction,
God,
is priceless. Stanley, where can people find you?
I am on most socials at OnlyStans85.
You can find me over at Obs Lounge ST, OBS for Observation, Lounge ST for Star Trek. And until next week, get the hell off my bridge.